All right. Welcome, everybody. We're glad you're here. We're going to give it just like another minute to 90 seconds to let other folks join. So tune in. Send this out if you want to share with your friends and people who you care about or people you don't. Doesn't really matter. We're just looking for numbers. So we just need thumbs ups. But yeah, go ahead and share it on socials and all your stuffs. And then we'll get started here in just 1 minute. Okay. Well, I see that Jordan Miller's here, so we're going to go ahead and get started. He's really the only one that
we have enough.
Yeah, he's the only one we cared about. So, there you go. I'm just kidding, everyone. Jeez, Lacey, don't get so upset.
Be nice to Lacey.
So we can see your chats and your comments. Make sure that that you comment as we go. You can do that on YouTube Live or Facebook, and we see all of those aggregated into one window here. So we'll try and address those as we can. And yeah, so we're excited to be here. Welcome to episode 2. And if you find this helpful, make sure you share it afterwards as well. And you can just share the link. So yeah, let's get started. So I don't know what your screens look like, but I have Phil Grimpo to my left. Phil Grimpo is the owner, CEO, proprietor, president, and all things Inspire Media Productions. If you're using anyone else, you are really making a bad choice. So you're going to want to talk to Phil for all of your technical needs and things like that. So Phil, thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
And then here down, she's at the bottom center of my screen, is Leah Abel. And Leah has a consulting company. I wrote down where did I write that down? Hang on, let me get it right.
You told me it was too long and that I should change it. If I recall.
So Leah has a company called Able Project Management and Consulting, and you can get there leahable.com, I believe. There it is at the bottom of the screen. So you're welcome. And I'm Adam Countryman. I'm a worship leader and director of worship arts and owner of Countryman Consulting. So we're glad that you're here today. And we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to go in a different order for this webinar than we did for the last one. And again, we'll address the questions as they come in. So, we know there's a lot of folks coming from a lot of different kinds of places. So we're looking forward to it. So I think Phil's going to kick us off.
Leah's going to kick us off.
Nope, Leah's going to kick us off. I'm well informed.
All right. So last week when we met kind of on this webinar format, we talked a little bit about where are we at right now? What does it mean as we consider the technology that we have and the planning and the virtual work that we have? Today, we're going to shift just a little bit because some of us, we're all in kind of different spots, but some of us are in places that are starting to look at the transition back to live. Not that we're ready to go live, but moving from virtual to live and the sticky in between is going to be the toughest part, I think, or it's going to be a tough part. So what we want to kind of do today is give you guys a few tools, a few ideas for how to manage that transition. And I think really more than anything, how do you make decisions about what to do next? Because it really does feel, from my seat, so I'm I work from home all the time. I manage projects and events and things like that. I'm married to a pastor, and so I'm kind of watching him live through this as well, and work with a lot of churches. And so as we do that,
he is very attractive, Scott. If you guys haven't seen him.
Oh, and he's a haircut.
He's new to Facebook, so make sure you friend him.
Can we please open the salon? Man needs a haircut. Anyway, what I was going to say was, I really think part of what I've seen and what I've heard in a lot of conversations with church friends and colleagues is that it's overwhelming to not know what the next phases look like, what the requirements are going to be, what the kind of questions are. And so what I'm seeing is people that are waking up at 3 in the morning, kind of, wrestling through the possibilities, or you're having conversations with your spouse, the person next to you, but maybe not connecting yet to your team to really strategize and say, what are we going to do? And so I'm going to kind of briefly in the next like 10 or 15 minutes here, share with you a couple of processes, just a couple of ways that you could approach planning for now, for next, and for kind of after, whatever after means. And something that I like to say that I think is really important is if you can decide now how to decide then, or what your options that you're deciding from are, it's really going to take you a long way. And so I want to give you a couple options for how to do that. So Phil, I can't remember, do I get to advance my slides or do you do it for me?
No, you do it.
Okay, thank you. Because obviously I do this technology all the time. I'm learning too, friends. Okay, so kind of two processes. The first one I want to walk you through kind of quickly is how do you prioritize and plan your transition response? So what's kind of a quick way you could do that? And the second one is really more dealing with the unknown piece. So how do you brain dump? And I'm saying brain dump and not brainstorm because there's so many possibilities. I think we need to somehow get those out and then build a high level response. So not super detailed plans, but how can you get those kind of key pieces out so you can get started? So let's walk through that if we can. The first piece I would say with this prioritize and plan the transition responses is you want to go through three kind of pieces. And the first one is to have a real conversation with your key leaders. And maybe for you, that's your board of directors. Maybe for you, that's your staff. Maybe it's both. But what is the most important thing to you as you come out of this? And so really in this process, I'm looking at not so much the now management, but the transition management. So what's most important to us? What are our priorities? And they could be a lot of different things. Maybe your priority is that you really want to be about responding to the economic needs in your community. Or maybe your priority is that you want the sense of community that was developed during this time to remain or increase. You can have lots of different priorities, but I think to say, as we come out of this, what matters most to us? And then I'd say clarify down to 1 or 2 priorities. If you have 7 priorities, you do not have any priorities, okay? You have 7 things you want to do, and that's a checklist, not priorities. So I really would say to decide what are the 1 or 2 things that matter most to you. Maybe it's safety, depending on what your congregational makeup looks like. So really kind of think through that. So clarify those top 2 and then build phased plans. So what I'm going to do is just kind of walk you quickly through what that could look like. And Adam and Phil, feel free to just jump in and.
Oh, we will.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so here's some priority examples. I mentioned these earlier. Maybe it's you want to connect those who joined us online to your in-person community. Maybe that's your number 1 priority. Maybe the second one is, or another one is we want to capitalize on the individual connections we were able to make and build some relationships. Maybe it's you want to be ready if we have to do this again. You want to be up and ready. Or maybe your priority is to serve your community as they go through the economic impact. So it could be a ton of things. Really, Phil and Adam and I are here to kind of talk through, here's our processes and what we're thinking about, what we see from our perspectives, but not to tell you what to do because your context is different, where God's called you and how you have to serve is different. So let's just say these are one of your priorities. Let's just decide that your top priority is to serve your community as they walk through the economic impact of this whole thing. So if that's the case, the next piece you're going to want to do is kind of brainstorm that out and build some action plans around it. So if you go on our Church NeXt or even on my website as well, you can find like a kind of a quick 60-minute, how do I do a quick action plan thing. But once you decide on what you're trying to do, you just want to plan that out. So what are your key actions and activities? What resources do you need, which could be people, could be money, could be all kinds of things. Who are the owners? So maybe it's you're sitting at this table and you've decided on your priority and you're starting to plan out what you're going to do. Who else needs to own pieces of that? So that's kind of key, but you can look at that in more detail elsewhere. And then give yourself some start dates or some due dates. I often say with action plans that if a whole group owns something, no one owns it. And also if there is no timeline connected to it, it's probably not going to happen or it's not going to happen to the last second. So maybe for you, that's, hey, this is our 30-day plan or 60 plan, whatever. Or maybe it's really connected to checkpoints for you. So maybe you say, The first Sunday that we're able to have live services, like that's a checkpoint. So we're going to plan for that checkpoint. And maybe the next checkpoint is 2 weeks after, or maybe a checkpoint for you is when the stay-at-home order ends or whatever that might be. But that's kind of what that could look like just a little bit. Phil or Adam, any thoughts or brilliant insights on what I've just shared?
I think your point about priorities is super important. As churches, we often take a shotgun approach, right? So we say, well, what's your priority? Well, we want to be there for our community and the economic recovery. We want to launch new small groups. We want to do this. We want to spread the gospel. We want to open our doors. We want to feed the hungry. We want to, so on and so forth. And I think narrowing that down to 1 or 2 is so important so that you can stay on task and stay on mission. And I think that's brilliant. I mean, if you're in an environment where you could agree on the top 2, that's awesome. I think that's amazing.
And maybe if you're not in an environment where you can agree on the top 2, and I think this goes back to a lot of what we talked about the last time about team, and like if you're going to use a shared workspace, you have to commit to it. I think now's a time to do some work as a staff or as a ministry team. Maybe that's volunteers as well, to say, can we commit to this? And can we together build a plan for this? Now, maybe we want to do this one as well, and that's in our 60-day plan or whatever. But our first 2 priorities, let's build actual plans for those.
And maybe even your individual areas of responsibility, right?
Yeah.
So
I think one of the most difficult pieces right now is that we don't control the timeline necessarily. So you may be thinking, well, in our 60-day plan is that we're going to be ready to go live, or we're going to be incorporating this audience, but then all of a sudden in 2 weeks you're being pushed to open live, or we're going to be doing this in 30 days, but then you hear that for the next 2 months or 3 months, you're still going to be doing the online stuff. So it's interesting. You kind of have to have some pieces ready that can be completely flexible and being implemented maybe before you're ready or when you're not quite ready yet. Like, what are those chunks?
Yeah.
Everything's fluid right now, right?
It totally is. And actually, that's a really great transition to this kind of next process that I want to walk you through. So this next process is really about dealing, I think, with what Phil just said, like the fact that we don't really have control over the timeline. So I'm a big timeline girl and I love things like that, which is part of why this has been so hard for me, because I like a plan and suddenly I'm not in charge of the timeline, like at all. And so one thing that a process that I think is helpful is to kind of get out of your head, here's the options, here's the phases, et cetera. So let me just walk you through and again, this is just like one option, but like here's a way to walk through that potentially. So that kind of the 5 pieces of that would be, first you're going to brain dump the what ifs and the when ifs, okay, because it's a lot of ifs still. Then you're going to brainstorm possible responses to each of those. You're going to study and discuss those ideas and kind of work through what are the best options for each of those possibilities. And then prioritize based on what you know or think right now, because you don't know what you're going to know in 2 weeks, but you do know something now. And then the last one would be to decide when to revisit that conversation and to update those plans. And I've done that with a few folks already. Phil and I were talking earlier about some live events that are in the fall clients that he's working with, and kind of helping them figure out, okay, here's what we know now. So how can we plan possibilities for that? So here's just a kind of a quick example, I guess I'll say for that. So let's say that in your brain dump of what the possibilities are, that here's 5 options for you, okay? So one maybe is that stay at home lasts through June. Maybe there's a phase coming quickly where 50 people can gather at a time, or a phase coming where 100 people can gather at a time. Maybe there's no limit at all for you, but not everyone's gonna gather because of safety concerns and safety issues. Or maybe there's no limit as long as you can keep people 6 feet apart. So let's just say those are 5 of your options. And wherever you are, you got lots of different options, or options rolling around in your head as you know your space and your context. So get all those ideas out. There's 5 examples. I'm picking one of those. So let's say that in your context, you're given permission to have 50 people gather at a time. So you're going to take that and you're going to say, what are our responses if we could do 50 people gather at a time? So kind of think, I'd probably usually do like a mind map thing, because it helps me think, like get a big piece of paper or a whiteboard or even an online mind map, which would work well if you're working with a team virtually, and say, okay, what are my options? If we can do 50 people at a time. So I just quickly came up. Here's 3. We could offer multiple worship service times and invite people by last names. That's an option. Didn't say it was a good one or a bad one. It's just an option. You could put people in different rooms in the building. So 50 people in fellowship hall, 50 people in the youth room, 50 people in the sanctuary. Maybe one of your options is we're going to keep the live stream and we're going to say we aren't gathering until we can have at least 100 people or whatever your number might be. So that would be what I would mean by kind of brainstorm your responses. And then what I do is take that response. So I put those responses at the top of this, but again, you could just do this on paper or mind map it. And then I would go through kind of these 4 things. As you look at each of those potential responses, what's the best thing about that plan or response? What's the worst thing about that plan or response? And then you could just do like a straight up pro and con list. And then the big question, how does this response connect to our priorities as a church? What you've decided is important. As you think about your vision and your mission and your goals, what makes your church unique? How does this response fit with that? And then I would just give yourself a space for all the questions. Here's all the things we don't know if we went that route. And again, the goal of this is like, lay it out, like get all that stuff out on paper and stop worrying yourself in a circle. Just get it out and start kind of moving it forward so that, as Phil said, you can be developing a response as you kind of go. So once you get those kind of response sort of pieces done and you do that work of building priorities and deciding what's good and what's bad, the last thing that I'd say you should do is then prioritize and say, okay, so knowing what we know now, if we had to decide today, what are we going to do? So I was having a conversation with someone about a fall event this last week. And at the end of the conversation, we said, okay, based on what we know today, what would we most like our options to be? And we kind of went 1, 2, 3. This is our first choice. This is our second choice. This is our third choice. And then just kind of left it there. So that's kind of a quick version, I guess, a quick way I would say that you could walk through your response stuff and kind of get it out of your head onto paper. And not just onto paper, but also involving your team, whatever that team looks like.
And I think that this is important to have the big group discussions. I've noticed that there's some fractured conversations happening. The tech people are talking about something. The pastors are talking about something. Children's ministry is talking about something. And we're not just getting in the room and hammering out the plan and getting on the same page because, I'm coming from the technical side and you may think that's a great idea as a pastor, as a worship leader, whatever, but there's some implications there that you don't know. Or I may think, well, here's a great technical approach, but maybe some of those other processes aren't in place. So you need to get the right people in the room to go through this process you just talked about.
Yeah, and it could even be as simple as maybe a representative from each of those areas. So you have a conversation over there and you bring back, hey, here's where we're at. This is what we're concerned about. This is what we're thinking about, and then hammer that out. Because 30 people on a Zoom call is tough, but you can do 5, or you can work Google Docs and stuff in a pretty effective way, like we talked about last time.
Sure.
There's a comment from Jordan in the chat, and he says, I need this plan with my wife and I for any decision. So Leah, I think if this consulting on a professional level for organizations doesn't work out, you have a great future in marriage counseling,
especially with Jordan.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, Jordan, you may want to call Leah after this and have her get in touch with your wife. I think that'd be helpful.
So I'm going to kind of hand this over to Phil, because Phil, I think, is going to do a really great job of so I did sort of some high level, what if this, what if that, how do you work through a process to get that on the table and set priorities? And Phil's really going to take this next piece and say, how do you look at the sound, tech, worship options? What are your options? How do you make decisions? And I think it's super, just really helpful stuff. So take it away, Phil Grimpo.
All right. So I'm going to talk about some next steps from a technological standpoint. And I think you kind of have 3 options. So I'm thinking about what happens when we can get in the room in some capacity. The first option is we just stop streaming. Okay. The second option is we keep recording and posting or streaming, streaming live, but with a pre-recorded version. And then the third option is that we actually stream live, which means as the service happens, we start streaming. And I'm not going to get super technical in these. I know I said I was going to, but I think that I have too much material to put in here. So some of these we're going to break down, and I'll talk about some future videos that are coming up. So the first option, stop streaming. It's easy. You just quit. Just stop. Just say, as of this date, we are back in the room and we are going to stop streaming.
Be a quitter.
Be a quitter. There's a couple problems with this. The first one is, are we losing an audience that we've been gaining over this time? I think I believe that there are people who have come to faith, have learned about God for the first time in this crisis by streaming offerings that are out there. And are we just turning that off? That's something to consider. The other thing is, you're probably going to have more of a tiered approach to bringing people back. I know that in Nebraska, and I think also in Texas and probably some other states, they're maybe not allowing numbers in, but they're saying you can bring whoever you want in as long as every family unit 6 feet apart. So we ran the numbers and said, okay, who are the 250 people we say can't come to church this week? And how do we get them in the door? So we probably need to do some hybrid for quite a while. And I think, Adam, you guys were talking about, like, what are our numbers? Like, half the people said we're just not coming until it's an all clear, maybe. So I think we have to do something for a while. So just stopping in the short term is probably not an option. The next one is we keep recording and posting like we've been doing. And I think the benefits of that is that if you're really serious about creating this online culture, to have a custom service for them is a great idea. So it cuts out some of the stuff that we do in the room live that don't really work for an online audience. And it maybe adds some things that we want the online audience to have to deal with that we don't need to do in the room. So if you have one audience, you can say, we want the length to be shorter. Maybe we want this service to be a half hour long instead of 45 minutes long. Maybe we have different announcements, because that announcement at the end of the service, it says, meet us at the fellowship area outside, or we got donuts and coffee in the back. They don't have that online. That audience doesn't make any sense to them, and it alienates them in a way. You don't need to worry about the live congregation. You can mix the audio, you can cut the video the way that you want, and not have to worry about what's going to be seen in the room. So maybe you even have different custom announcements and a different intro before the service for the online audience. But I think there are some complications in doing it this way. So some things to consider is that your sermons are going to have to be prepared and recorded in advance. And you're going to need to bring in some crew to do that, unless you have the staff to do it. But that staff that maybe had some downtime with COVID and could jump in and help, now they're not available to be doing this full time.
Also, pastors love working ahead.
Yeah.
I know my husband does.
It's their specialty.
Almost like, slow down.
It's completely different rhythm. And it's a rhythm we adjusted to, but now we also have Sunday morning. Right. So maybe you say, well, we're not going to bring in the band every week and have them perform, or the band or the organist, whatever, go on Sunday, but then also go on Wednesday or Tuesday or whatever. So do you have a library of songs, which is a way to handle this, but have you been building that up? When are you going to do that? If it's an organist, that person can probably knock out a lot of hymns pretty quickly, but when are you getting the choir in to record? When are you getting the band to come in and record 20 or 30 different pieces? So that may be something you need to consider. And then we have burnout with your staff, because now you're not just doing this one production a week, but then you also need to go live on Sunday in the room with your live people. So it's kind of a lot of double duty for people.
And I see your note on there, Phil, about plus the post-production thing, which I think is big, because when you're recording and posting, you've got somebody who's doing all that editing, which we've gotten used to, but we also have probably had time,
right,
that we wouldn't have when we're running our normal schedules.
Yeah. So I like this option if you're really serious about an online congregation, but it is a lot of work that maybe people aren't thinking of, because we're also coming back live. Mm-hmm. So then the third option is to just stream live. I think the benefits of this are we just hit stream and go. It's kind of our natural instinct. Maybe we already have cameras in the room, or a camera, and just when the pastor is ready to go at 9 o'clock, we hit stream. And when we're over at 10 o'clock, we hit stop. So that seems pretty simple. Maybe we've done this before. We know how this works. So we just go back to our other modified schedule. I know for our congregation, we're going like every other week right now. So on one weekend, we'll stream live at 9 o'clock, and then we'll pre-record the next week. So everybody's getting together every other week. Other folks are going week by week, but doing it during the week. So we kind of have a rhythm that we know and are comfortable with. And then there's less time with post-production. We don't have to do any of that stuff potentially, where everything's happening on Saturday or Sunday or Monday or whenever you do your worship. So those are some of the benefits, but some gotchas just to consider is that, is this a serious audience like we talked about before, or are they just a fly on the wall watching us do worship? So are we catering it all to this audience? And I talk about with congregations that are maybe doing something live in the room. You may say, I don't want to have a camera operator standing there. I don't want to lose the seats for a camera operator. I don't want to have to address a camera. And some of the big churches have camera cranes and they light differently. Well, at some point, some of these large ministries have made a shift to, we are for the live congregation and our online audience is a fly on the wall. Two, we are for an online audience and the congregation is a live studio audience. And so those things shift and the room is going to look differently because you are actually part of a broadcast more than trying to include the virtual audience into your congregation. So it's a different mindset you may want to consider, maybe not shifting all the way, but having a hybrid. So there may be some concessions you need to make if you're going to take the online audience seriously.
Well, and I think as you walk through those priorities, like we talked about earlier, if you're cultivating that virtual audience is a priority, then you really need to think about which of these options kind of takes you there the most effectively.
Right. Exactly.
Well, and to one of your other points, Phil, like I think that we're going to see, there are people who have come to church, quote unquote, or come to asking questions about faith online that are never going to step foot in your church.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that may be because they live next door and they're just not going to do it because it's something happened. They're a recovering Catholic or something happened to them. Right. But they're not going to do it. Or they're in Africa or Germany or Australia and other countries as well. And they're not going to obviously be coming into your church. So, but they have found you somehow. One of their friends posted it online and now they're watching every week. I think that's amazing. So, I mean, I think to not acknowledge the fact that these people aren't all going to come to your church, it will help us kind of hone in on why we're doing it and how we do it.
That's very true. And I don't know, we're not a big survey congregation, but it'd be interesting to know when you run those analytics and see those numbers, how many of those are like legit from other countries and stuff. It'd be interesting to know and to poll some of these people, some of your viewing audience in some way and see what are their intentions down the line. Are they going to come back or are they a new audience member? Because we don't know. When we started broadcasting our services, we were getting 2,000 people per service. Okay, I don't know how many of those just watched all three or just left their computer on and forgot about it. I have no idea. It's gone down a bit after Easter. We saw a drop. But when we go live, then does it drop to 10? Does it go from 2,000 to 10? I don't know. And there's a lot of things we do for 10 people in a congregation, you know. Is this something we do for 10 people? So we got to, it's interesting to evaluate that audience.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next piece is if we're streaming live, kind of a big thing here is, do we have all the volunteers in place? You may have been able to do this while people weren't working at their jobs and they had some free time to come in, and you were able to take your business manager and have them in and come and run a camera on Wednesday afternoon to shoot. But now, do you week in and week out have camera operators, directors, playback people, graphics, audio? Do you have all the volunteers? And that can be a big piece. You want to have people who are skilled, so you don't need just y'all come now, but you also don't want to burn people out. So I know for us, our tech teams, we don't want to have any more than 3 people on a position. Audio is typically 1 person. It's a paid position. Directors is a group of maybe 2 or 3. Camera operators is 3, so that they are practicing quite often. So it's potentially a lot of people. I'm not saying that to be afraid of it, because if you're doing a great broadcast and there's a great mission there, it's definitely something people are going to want to be involved in. But start now with thinking about how many people do you need, and can you start building up that volunteer core?
So when you say director, you just mean the person who's deciding what is going on the screen that people that are watching live are seeing. So they're just making those choices as you go.
Yep. And then your graphics and playback may be different. I was saying earlier, maybe before the live stream, there's a person who welcomes the online audience, and that doesn't show up on your screens in the room. It just shows up in the broadcast. How are we doing that? Maybe in the room, your screens are, and this is the situation we have at one of our campuses where the screens have already been full screen lyrics. We didn't have cameras in the room. So now we're saying, well, we're doing a picture-in-picture thing, but long-term, are we going to make those lower thirds? And do we need to recreate all our graphics for the room? Or now do we have two people running lyrics, one for the room and one for the broadcast? That's two computers to prepare every week, two sets of hardware, two people to run graphics for during the songs.
So if you're making those calls to decide what you can actually do, volunteer-wise is big.
Well, or if you're a church that uses hymnals,
right?
How are you going to supply the lyrics?
Yeah.
or shots of the hymnal or what for your online church, because a lot of those churches aren't doing screens regardless. They don't have screens. So if you have an online audience now, how are you going to get that into their hands?
That's a good point. Another thing with graphics, I was watching a service this last week, and it was a hymn where in the hymnal, every line, every phrase of the hymn is capitalized, but the way it was put on the screen was in paragraph format. So it's very hard for the viewing audience to follow that hymn. So if you haven't been creating graphics and stuff before, now you have a whole nother level. And I may add to here a stream just to talk about graphics for church. Jordan Miller, you wrote here in ProPresenter 7, you can do both. Yes, in ProPresenter 7, you can have one type of one screen formatted to go up to your main screens and then a lower third. The issue we ran into is that our main screen ones are very complex with a lot of animation. It didn't translate well to Pro 7, and you can't master slave Pro 7 yet. But
I don't even know what you just said.
Jordan does.
Okay,
so
good.
I love to kind of geek out every once in a while, folks. So, but Jordan, if you have some more ideas of that, I would love to talk to you about it. Okay, and then also Adam Rodriguez, you talked about the Roland V1 HD. Very familiar with that switcher. I'm going to do a session on switchers coming up, and I can also talk with you offline on that. Okay, so Jordan Miller, just really quickly, I'll just show this, Jordan. He says also there's copyrights on LSB for some hymns that don't allow you to put those graphics online. So I know there has been a lot of talk, and I know on the Wally page, I think Haley did a lot of discussion and talking with CPH about copyrights, and definitely look into that stuff. Broadcast is a different animal.
Yeah, and that goes to Facebook users comment. Someone who's scared to leave their name, and they said, "Does CCLI allow pre-recorded songs?" And the short answer is no, but there's some nuances there that you're going to want to look at in terms of your license and what you're playing. I know for us, we're just using stuff that we own. So stuff that I've done in the past or other members have done or that I've gotten permission to use.
And
they go for that to figure out that nuanced stuff, Adam.
Well, CCLI can help you with that, and the Song Select website has a tab that has all the outlines on there. The other thing is some of those forums, like what Phil just talked about, like the Wally forum and places like that on Facebook, are very helpful.
And I think we're going to see some changes in copyrights as well. Now, knowing that how many churches are needing to do this, my guess is if they're wise, they'll come out with some other programs to be able to do this.
That's good.
Okay, next one here. Are there different things in the service that we need to tighten up or change? And that I talked about a little bit earlier. So what happens during the offering? What happens during communion? Do we run different announcements during that time? How do you do that with your technology? So I jumped the gun a little bit on that, but those are some things to consider. If there's a lot of dead time. I know for us in our 211 services, we spent a lot of time when we initially programmed the service to say there's no downtime. Bam, bam, bam. The song's done. The pastor's there. The pastor says amen. The song starts, and the service itself is pretty tight. But often, like in a traditional service, and I know directing like conventions and youth gatherings and stuff where there's a more traditional service, there's so much downtime that in the room, we don't care because we have no problem just looking back and watching the ushers process in. But if you don't have cameras in place to do that and somehow make it interesting, it can get really boring for an online audience, and they can want to drop off. And I've even had watching some of these services, like I just want to fast forward and get to the sermon. I don't need to watch all this other stuff. I really can't participate. So those are some things to consider. A few more things here with streaming live, things to consider. If you've been using your iPhone, your Mevo, these cameras are close. You have I know some churches have cables run all over the place. I looked at one the other day and they have risers sitting in the middle of the congregation. That's great. You did what you needed to do to get it done. But now if we have to put people in that room, you can't really have cameras sitting in the front of the room with a camera operator and cables strung over the pews anymore. So how are we cleaning that up? Do we have the right cameras? I know that a lot of churches, and we helped them with this, made really quick decisions right when COVID happened to get a system up and going. We tried to think down the road, will this work? Some places really thought that through. Other places said, hey, we've just been shooting with an iPhone. That's great. But now when your camera's 60, 80 feet away, do you have the right lenses there to be able to get that close-up shot? So those are some things that as we're looking at the next steps, we're starting to think about where are those cameras going. Maybe it's time to start mounting them and getting the cabling done so that when they decide we're going to open, you're not scrambling and taking 5 days to try and get your church cleaned up. Something to consider there. Do you have a communication system? I talked about this a little bit last week, and if your pastor is speaking and there's an online audience that's in one of those cameras, he doesn't want to be looking at this camera the whole time talking, thinking that one's live when it's actually a center camera that was live. So you may want to look at some tally systems to be able to do that. And it depends on your switcher, and I'll try to address that in the switcher seminar coming up. But there are even some Wi-Fi ones that are really good, or we've done some homemade ones that engineers have helped us make, or it could be as simple as someone waves, I'm live, or they turn on a light to know that they're a live camera, or you just have a rhythm that says, Pastor, during your sermon, the center camera is your camera. We will have that live the whole time. So work out that communication so he knows where that audience is and can address them. Next here. Sorry.
Don't be so excited.
Yeah. Is your camera system also being used for image magnification? And what this is cameras onto screens in the room. And there are some churches that do this, some that don't, some that only use them for certain portions of the service. I work with a lot of churches that say, well, we really want to have our PowerPoint Pro presenter on the screen all the time, but when there's a baptism or when there's a children's message, we want that image magnification onto those screens. Or you've been doing your whole service with image magnification. My point here is that you will direct, as a director, you'll direct differently for if you're directing for screens in the room or for broadcast. In the room, I want magnification. I don't need a wide shot of the stage. People can see the wide shot. The shot they're looking for is the close-up of the hands on the keys, the close-up of the kids singing, the close-up of the guitar player or something like that. So those are the shots that I'm picking in the room for the in the room audience. But the broadcast audience, they never see the room. They don't see the beautiful decorations. One example is at the National Youth Gathering. If some of you have been there, we have these sweeping jib shots that get great, beautiful shots of the room and the band and the light show and all that stuff that people in the room can already see. So I don't need to be putting those all the time up on the screens. I do the close-up shots on the screens, and then we have another switcher that's taking those wide shots, and those are going out to the broadcast audience. So it's something to consider. Or I will think beforehand, I know that at this big part of the song, there's some effect that's happening in the room. I want to make sure I have a wider camera to capture that for the stream. And then maybe it still goes in the house, maybe it doesn't. But when we talk about switchers, those are some things to consider, that those are potentially two very different outputs, and you'll direct differently for those two.
So what people are seeing in the room and what's on the big screen is going to be different in some cases as you kind of design that. Sorry, this is like the layperson version of what you just said, Phil.
Yeah.
For then those who are watching the whole thing online. So you're gonna have to think about that. Like, what are those two pictures look like, and who's making those decisions? Or is somebody really thinking about the room, which Phil called the house, or somebody else is thinking about the online audience, and can you manage that as well?
Yeah, and it has its own complexities, but I just remember, and I do it too when I'm directing in the room. I see this great shot because I'm just watching it on TVs. I don't see the room.
Right.
I'm watching on TVs. I'm like, oh, I want to show this shot. And then you show it in the room, and people are like, why on our image magnification screens are the people like 1 inch tall? That doesn't help me in the room, in the congregation, but it does help the online broadcast. So it's just something to consider. And do you have a different way for mixing audio? We talked about this a little bit last week, but your audio, if you guys have done this, you mix, it's especially true if you're mixing a band and you mix the band and it sounds great live, and then you listen to the raw recording and it's awful. The room is very forgiving. Even, I don't know how, but it even helps with pitch. You're like, wow, I didn't realize our singer was that pitchy. Because in the room, it's just forgiving. Adam,
talking about you, Adam.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm aware.
In the room, it's very forgiving, but online is different. So we've talked about kind of our better sound operators are going to be the people who are mixing for broadcast. They're the guys who have to know how to use more plugins and reverb, and maybe there's pitch correction going on. Maybe there's even a better soundboard for broadcast. Last week we talked about, can you just mix on an auxiliary bus? Yes, you can, but you don't get some of those features and effects and plugins and things that you are going to want for broadcast. So it's kind of a technical thing, a high level thing. But if we're really looking at a broadcast audience, that audio quality is a big piece, and it's something to at least have on your radar.
Yeah, because for some people, that is the window into your church.
Exactly.
So if you're great live, but you suck online, you just suck.
Here, this person says this, there's forgiveness in the sanctuary, not on the computer. And really, when we're watching it on TV, and if you think about it, just a little tangent, when you watch like the Grammys or the Oscars or like these live musicals they've been doing on TV, you're like, man, these are awful. Well, that's because they didn't spend 6 months doing post-production on it. It is very difficult to do this stuff live. And even a lot of the things that we see are not truly live on TV. I mean, news broadcasts have a rhythm down, sports have a rhythm down, but something where it's lots of people, stagehands like the Grammys, the Oscars, even, some of the talent shows, Who's Got Talent and whatever. You see a lot more mistakes. It's very difficult to do. So even the pros have a tough time with it, but it's a lot of scripting, a lot that goes on in the back. And Adam and Lee and I have all worked on events where if you see how the scripting is actually done to make that look as easy as it did, it was a lot of work. When we work on bigger events, we go through every camera shot and write down where the camera's got to be for every part of every song. And the director has all those notes. So it can get really complicated to have a really good polished product.
Yeah, and so you really have to think about, how can we do this well with the resources we have? What's the simplest and best?
Right. And if you've been doing multi-camera stuff and then editing, if you think about all that time that you spend in the editing room, picking which shot is better, making changes, all that now has to happen in real time. And when you hit the wrong button and put the wrong camera up, that just happened. That's done. So it's not something to be intimidated by, but it's something you definitely need practice on. It doesn't just happen naturally.
Well, this has been a great nerd out. We're running a little short on time. So Phil, why don't you move on into your next one?
I'll put my last things up here. So up next, I'm going to do some shorts coming up. I'm talking about camera options, video switchers, lighting for broadcast, and audio for broadcast. I plan on having those done in the next couple weeks or so. So
and you can find those where, Phil Grippo?
We will be, I think I may be throwing them even live up here. Otherwise, they'll be on the ChurchNext .online website. And if you guys have other things you want me to address, make sure to put them in the comments, and I will address those topics as soon as I can.
Thanks. All right, now Adam's going to make it real for us. We're going to stop nerding out, and we're going to get real.
Yeah, man. Wow. You guys played Zelda? Okay, so I'm just kidding, guys. We're so sensitive. So we're gonna talk a little bit now about some real things and things that are helpful. My wife got me this mug. Somebody asked me the other day, it's weird that you bought that for yourself. And I'm like, my wife would totally divorce me if I bought this for myself, but she got it for me, so I can use it. Anyway, so some of the things to think about from a worship perspective, what has worked? So you've been doing this now for a few weeks, maybe longer. You're going to do it for a few more weeks, if not many more weeks. So depending on where you are. or you may just continue to do it indefinitely. But what has worked, what is working right now in your environment? So can we bring that into daily execution of ministry? So hospitality elements are huge. Maybe you've been welcoming your online community for the first time ever, even if you've been streaming for a long time. Waiting till the middle of the service to welcome your online community may not be the best idea, since they may have already decided whether they're staying or not. Do you know that they're there or not? Move that into your script it in, put it on Planning Center Online or whatever you're using to do that. We've been acting like we have visitors, right? We expect there to be visitors online. Expect visitors to come to your church. A huge thing has just happened. It may be that people are going to come to church for the first time. Maybe they saw you online, or maybe they didn't. But if you don't act like they're there, they ain't ever going to be there. That's a big thing. You know, a lot of churches are small enough, and they go, well, we don't have any visitors today, so I'm not going to address it. Well, then that becomes your norm. You know, you want to really make sure that you're paying attention to those kinds of things. The quality of our stream and production, has that been working? Do we need to make that better? In our case, we've made the stream a lot better. So now we're going, okay, well, when we go back to live, how are we going to do this? Because our quality is going to tank. Phil spoke a little bit about that last week. So we're trying to figure out, well, how do we make it good and maintain this quality that we've started now since COVID started? How can we make our room sound as good as our stream? You may be in a situation where your stream sounds way worse than your room. And probably that's most of us, right? But if not, like our stream sounds better than our room because our room sounds like crap. So,
well, and you've taken a lot of time to put production into that audio now.
Exactly. And we've been post-producing all of our audio. So because we've been doing that, we're going, okay, well, when people come back, like they're going to sit back in the room and all of a sudden it's going to be something totally different sonically to them. So what's been working? Well, we've been hiring a guy to post-produce. So maybe we need to hire a guy to run front of house audio. Now, as Phil said, you know, the online production is less forgiving. So maybe you hire a guy to do that and you get your top-notch volunteer to run that. As a side note, I've always said this, and I'll say it till the day I die, which may be soon. We don't really know. The guy that always should get paid, if you're paying no one else, pay your sound engineer. And I'm talking even up to senior pastor. Okay? Because it doesn't matter what your senior pastor says if nobody can hear him. So that's just my little soapbox aside there. Look into that. Okay. Do we need more time to rehearse the band and the music, since all that time online, you know, we've been rehearsing and then we've been recording and then we've been doing it twice. Does your band sound better? Do they work better together now? Well, maybe you need to carry that over into the future. Okay, well, instead of this 90-minute rehearsal, we need to rehearse for 2 hours on this night. We need to get together 30 minutes before service on Sunday, whatever you're going to do, because you're about to have a deadline again. And that deadline is live people staring at you. So you can't, when you mess up, you can't go, well, let's just do that take again. That's not going to work, right? I mean, granted, I have stopped live in worship because I messed up so bad I couldn't recover.
You know, Adam, I said that we do our 9 o'clock service live and then we record for the next week. Every 9 o'clock service, we've gone and you just go through it. And every time we've recorded for the second service, we've stopped within the first 3 minutes and said, let's start it over again.
You know you can.
That, and then we don't have it anymore.
Exactly. You know you can.
And you start, but you still run the whole thing. When you tape that second one, you just run the whole thing straight, right?
Yeah, we still run front to back. But it's like, do we just go with this? No, we can stop it. Run in the room. Stop. Let us fix something and we'll start over again because we can.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Camera positions. Phil spoke to this. You know, you have cables everywhere. You've got maybe you've got a camera on a stand or on a dolly or on a jib, or you put something right in the center. That's made the online experience so much better. how can you carry that over? Maybe you can, maybe you can't. But maybe instead of moving that camera all the way back to the back of the room, you could move it to halfway back. Okay. And if you do have to move it all the way back, maybe you can say, hey, we need this money for this lens to get us all the way to the front. And when people complain about it being in the way, or being there, you have to have leadership that's willing to say, hey, this served you for 6 weeks, 2 months, 4 months, however long. There's people who don't get to come back to church.
That is great, because a lot of people didn't experience this before and they had no idea what that audience is, and now they've sat in that seat. You can use that. Yeah.
They would have never streamed in the past.
We're about outward looking as a congregation, not just us. And now you have a whole nother way to say we're looking out, not just in. That's
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's caring for the people in the room and those who aren't in the room.
Absolutely.
Maybe you've been doing a lot more marketing, social media, and things like that. Maybe that's really been working for you. I know there's a group out of Georgia called Cardinal Ridge Group, and they're a phenomenal marketing company. They're a smaller group, so they're not, just, the one that you always see, but they have a heart for church and for ministry. They also do a lot of corporate things and entertainment industry and the service industry stuff. But maybe you want to employ a group like that moving forward to say, look, this is great. And we've been doing it on our own because we've had time, but now we don't. So how do we keep up that presence? How do we keep doing that? Jeffrey Mines had a quote a long time ago, and I hesitate to quote him because I don't like giving him any attention or credit, but he said at one point, he said something like, I hope my prayer is that the church doesn't go back into hiding after this. Mm-hmm. And I thought that's a great way to put that. If we disappear after this and go back to our own little country clubs and self-isolate, then what? Then it's a waste. All right. The next thing I want to talk about is moments. So
technical difficulties.
I'm having a moment. Okay. Sorry. Wow. That was unfortunate. Well, we all have problems. So the moments thing that I want to talk about is people live their life in moments. I live in this moment right now. Right now, my microphone just fell. Okay, that happened. That's the moment. There's moments that you want to create. And if you aren't creating moments, if you aren't thinking like that, you should be. People don't live programming like we do for churches, right? So we don't live, the normal people don't go, man, I loved how that pre-service song really tied into the benediction. It doesn't happen. And I'm sorry to burst everyone's bubble. If you can be thematic your whole service through, then that's great. And there's no problem with that. And maybe it connects. But the reality is that a lot of folks aren't connecting those dots the way that you are. So think of a moment as something that happens in your service that people can point to, that people lived through, that people remember. That's that thing that they grabbed onto. Maybe that's your message. Maybe there's a moment in the message where it always lands and comes home. That's great. But be thinking about that. If it, that's been really prevalent online. I've seen in a lot of churches where they're having like a special moment every week. Maybe that's communion online. Maybe that's the special song. Maybe that's a prayer that people have sent in photos from, or whatever it is. But you've been creating this idea in the name of community. Mm-hmm. How do you continue that when you go back to doing live services? And maybe there's something else live and there's something else for online. That's going to be up to you.
We've worked so hard at creating community. And I think before this, we just assumed community because we were all in the room together.
Right. Yeah.
And I
put it on them.
I think outside of creating those moments, they may not remember a moment that tied in, but they will remember a moment that distracted. Mm-hmm. So if you have a moment that distracts in the room, people maybe think about it for a while. Their mind might be gone, but they don't get up and leave. Online, a distracting moment could cause them to go somewhere else on the computer. So they don't have to all connect and reinforce and be memorable. But if they distract, I think you even have a greater risk with an online audience.
There's always that two-sided thing, right? The double-edged sword. And you're right. We've all been experiencing great distractions as well as we worship in our homes. So creating those moments week after week, really thinking through what's our moment here, what's the thing that's really tying this all together. Maybe it's a song at the end of the message. The possibilities are endless. I'm not going to go through them, but if that's something you're interested in me unpacking more, you can give me a shout and we'll talk about it. The last thing I want to talk about is expectations. So have the expectations of your congregation changed? I think that they would have had to. And maybe they're going to go right back to where they were when you come back. But my guess is that there's probably some things, some expectations that are changed, especially when we talk about, Leah had mentioned, working in phases. And that's how we're going to come back to church. It's not going to be all of a sudden everybody comes back to church. Because even if the government says everybody can come back to church and we have a cure, some people aren't. They're going to go, I'm going to wait a while. I'm going to wait and see if there's a resurgence of this. I'm going to wait and see blah, 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 blah. So I think, as you come back, you're thinking in these phases, well, that changes the expectation, right, of even what it was before. So, we've had people, and I'm sure you have too, that say, well, that's my seat. I've been sitting in this seat since I was here in 1956, and this is where I sit. And sometimes those people have even asked people to move out of their seat. Oh, I'm sorry, you didn't know, but this is my seat. So I'm going to need you to scoot in. Yeah, there's always that kind of thing, right? Well, now they haven't sat in that seat for a long time. They've been at home. So they're going to come back and want to sit in that seat, and that's fine. But maybe there's things that you can address, like that thing. That's an expectation that they have. I can't wait to get back to my seat. Okay, that's great. But let's talk about the fact that a lot of new people may be coming, and if they're here first, maybe you just move to a different row because you're already going to heaven. They've been exposed to different elements of worship style and presentation. I know we had a lot of people from our traditional service going, we had no idea what you guys did at the late service. Mm-hmm. And we just assumed it was this like rock and roll pyrotechnic show, like Kiss was coming every week. It's like stupid, no, so now they've seen it and they like it. A lot of them like it. And maybe they like it because they can hit mute. I don't know, but they like it and they're expecting it now online. So maybe you throw some of that in here and there if you've got different worship styles. Same thing goes for contemporary folks. We've been doing one service online, so we've had an organ hymn at those services, and our contemporary people, maybe that's when they get up and go to the bathroom, but maybe they like that. I don't know. So, the expectation may be a little bit different. Can we adopt the things, that we got rid of when we were doing online worship? So that could be how we take up our offering. Do we have worship guides still? Do we need an online greeting, or is the whole thing geared toward online? Are there things that we had been saying, we want to get rid of that, but we don't know how, and now it's not happening? So do you just want to not start it up again? And that goes to a lot of what Leah was talking about. What's important when you come back, and what are those points when you come back? And what are you really looking at? What's important to you? So those are the three things that I think are really important for worship folks and churches to say, what has worked? What are we going to keep? Think about it in terms of moments, and then also expectations. In the last couple of minutes that I have, I just want to talk about kind of where our church is at, because we're in a little bit of a unique situation being in Texas. The governor of Texas, Governor Abbott, issued, he lifted the stay-at-home order as of this coming Friday. So this coming Friday, we don't have a stay-at-home order anymore. We don't have a mask mandate in the state of Texas. We have recommendation to wear a mask, but we don't have a mask mandate. There's also no limit. He said churches can open this weekend. Now, he said they can open, but you got to leave every other row apart, and family groups can sit together. You still need to keep 6 feet, but there's not even a percentage of occupancy for us in Texas. So we've really been kicking around the idea of, are we going to open in phase 1 of our reopening plan as early as this weekend? Now we've decided, we're not sure, but we think we're leaning toward, no, we're not going to do that this weekend, but it's coming in a week or two. But we still got to do online. Right? Like we know that you can assume that at least 50% of your people aren't comfortable coming back into a setting like that. So how's all that going to shake out? I don't really know. We're threading that needle of, what I've noticed through this whole thing is everybody's doing that. Like our mayor issued a statement. He's threading the needle to not upset the governor. The governor's threading the needle to not upset the federal government and to please all of his mayors. Everybody's doing that. So we have people in our congregation, and so do you, who say, if we go back, that's dangerous. And then we have people who are going, this whole thing's ridiculous. We should have been back weeks ago. And then you got people who are realists and who are going, I'm not sure. I need more information. And that's what we're seeing. So that's kind of where we're at. We're talking about doing an online service from here on out, and what does that look like even when we're back fully?
So one thing that I'd like to say as well too is, as you're thinking about what do those phases potentially look like, and what are you planning for? Adam had sent me like the 50-page document from the Texas governor yesterday. I did not read 50 pages, but I did read the 3 pages on the church stuff, and for me that was helpful. And that's one place, that's one region. But as you're kind of going, what are our options? It was helpful to read and say, okay, so here's what they're saying the minimum requirements are and the recommendations. And so it might be a useful thing for you to look at what's happening in other places that maybe are ahead or pushing things more quickly than what you are. If you're interested in the Texas document, I'm sure you can find it online or email me and I'll send you the bit that I pulled out. But just interesting to think about what it's requiring of what you do with volunteers, all that kind of stuff, logistics, doors, seating. Might be helpful for you to kind of, as you're thinking through what might be the next phase for us.
Yeah.
Great. We had one little tip for not a what's next, but what now. There's a pastor who says that he had a hard time adjusting when he preaches. He usually reads the room. So he had a hard time adjusting to that. So now he has his band or some volunteers sit kind of right out there under the camera he's talking to somehow provide some visual feedback for him. So if you're a pastor having a hard time preaching to an empty room, that's a good idea. I think that's also good for pacing and having some people singing and providing some type of a feedback in the space. It's a good idea.
Yeah, I would pick people that you like, not people that you wish weren't on your staff or something. That would probably be more helpful. It's just a thought. I'm not a pastor. Well, not anymore. What?
I also see a comment here about are people considering adding more services? I think that's something that you should put on your, kind of as you kind of do your, what are our options? That might be one of them. And I think that's where, instead of just what ifing yourself to death, if you can kind of say, okay, we could add more services, we could do this, we could do that, lay all that out, and then kind of, decision tree it out a little bit to see like, where does that take you? And what does that mean? What would that require of us? That kind of thing. So
for more examples of the decision tree, you could watch the previous episode.
There you go. Well, and even in Adam for Texas, I noticed it said that you need to disinfect the seats and the pews in between services.
In between,
so,
yeah,
in between. So that's one of the minimum requirement in Texas.
Yeah.
So
we're actually going to gut the pews too. So like all the stuff that's in the back of your pews, like all the candy wrappers and gum that kids have stuck in there and that gets stuck to the bottom of the hymnal or the welcome cards or whatever, we're going to have to take all that out because we don't want to disinfect every pen in between services, but it also changes your service times because you need time to do that.
If you're going to say, okay, we're opening up, but now we have to do 5 services or 8 services over 2 days. Okay. But you need to think about your spacing of those because you can't do them back to back. You have to think about your doors. How are people coming in? How are they getting out? Start looking now, my friends, for disinfectant stations because you're going to probably be required to have those. So I don't know who else sells them. I would just buy the pumps from Amazon because those will be hard to get. But there are companies that do those as well. So start thinking about that. Your janitorial staff probably can help you with that.
Well, and where you order now, where you get your supplies now. So maybe you use Hilliard or one of the other companies. Get a hold of them and get on that list to get those things delivered now. Yeah. Because if you wait till you open, you're not going to have them. You want to get them in now.
Great. Well, thanks, everybody. I think we're a few minutes over, but I really appreciate people staying with us. If you have more questions, I also put on our website, there is a subscription now. If you want to join an email list so that we can get stuff out to people, go to churchnext.online to see that. If people have other questions, you can keep posting them in the comments or go to Facebook, and then also pay attention to Facebook and Church Next Online for the tech things I'll be doing later. And Adam, trophy husband. All right. Thank you, everybody. Everybody have a great day. Be blessed. And I'm glad we're all here to support each other.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.